Today, I'm excited to chat with Jennifer Van Rossum. She is a licensed psychotherapist and founder of Five Peaks Life and Wellness, dedicated to expanding mental wellness beyond the walls of therapy. Jennifer's specialty is treating anxiety and building resilience, and her mission is helping people experience joy, hope, and meaning through both the good and the hard parts of life. Jennifer is an inspiring example of passion for an integrated approach to wellness, not shying away from the body and spiritual aspects of wellness, which I love. Depth psychology is in alignment with the root of psychology, which is breath and soul. It makes sense, and my personal experience affirms that coming into deeper relationship with the self, capital S, allows for deeper connection with others and what transcends you, whether you call that community, humanity, nature, God, the quantum realm, or the field of infinite possibilities. Coming into a healthier relationship with our body is part of the path to self. And Jennifer has studied the human mind and behavior for over 2 decades. She values the science of the body-mind connection. Her credentials are many: certified mindfulness-based cognitive therapist, resilience and well-being consultant, mental strength trainer, mindfulness and meditation teacher, movement instructor, and wellness program creator for organizations. She truly has a unique approach that feels fluid, like a dance between the feminine unconscious and masculine intellect. You won't be surprised that just this week, Jennifer was voted for the second year in a row as #1 mental health provider in her community, Lake County, Wisconsin, my home state. One more thing that makes this a special conversation. Jennifer is one of my former clients. I'll let her share her story about the nudge she felt to work with me personally and how she benefited personally and professionally by Jungian approaches she wasn't an expert in. So let's get started. Welcome, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. What's going on in your life right now? It's been a while since we chatted. I know your oldest is in the middle of college, and that's a big moment for parents. And also,
Mm.
congratulations on your recognition. And, one question I had about that was like, I mean, that must be a cool experience to have people vote. It's kind of like a humbling experience. And I just wonder if like there were any is there's like a thread that runs through like why people appreciate you. So wherever you want, however you want to start, wherever you want to go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll touch on the first thing. Yes, my oldest is in college. He's a freshman. So we are definitely in midlife and growing up alongside now boys becoming men. It's very different than
Yeah.
when they were little, but it's fun and exciting, along with the growing pains that come along with that. And then I have my middle guy is going to be a junior, currently a sophomore, and then my youngest is in eighth grade. He'll be a freshman in high school. So we're just kind of like
Um,
at that teenage transition of life, which is good. It's fun. It's a fun new relationship building that you get with your kids.
yeah.
Thank you for the congratulations. It is a
Mhm.
sweet honor to get from my community. They've been doing it now for maybe about 5 years, and I think it was just the past couple of years that my name kind of went in there. So to be put on top is certainly like a very humbling and honoring experience.
Yeah. So like is there, I mean, we're going to learn about how unique your combination of like areas of expertise and your approach and your just hunger for like reaching out for more. Like,
Mhm.
is that part of what draws people to you? Is that sort of unique combination?
I think so. Um, it's interesting. People who vote can make comments.
Mhm.
Certainly I've gotten reviews and everything like
Mhm.
that in the past. But a common thread that I often hear is that I have a calming presence,
Mm.
which to me is kind of um, ironic given how much I can vibrate with anxiety. We both know that. Um, but I really do think that, you know, how I adapted in life to kind of manage chaos
Yeah.
is beneficial to others. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of nice to have that recognized by others.
Yeah. Well, you know what comes to mind is that saying, like, we teach what we need to learn,
Hmm.
right? So you have a calming presence for me. My presence is like a hummingbird. right?
Mm.
So mine is the opposite. So I love being, whether it's a client or somebody or another professional, I love being around people who have that calming presence.
Mhm.
Oh, I love it. So I love your story and your professional path. I know more about you now preparing this for this interview about a different part of your life than before. And
Mhm.
from a depth perspective, I'm always interested in like the sneaky psyche and how the unconscious is working behind the scenes and pushing and prodding and how
Mhm.
synchronicity causes us to go this way or that way. And sometimes we ignore it and then we end up going this way and we circle back around. And I was
Mhm.
really curious about, how did you come to pursue this dual master's program in movement therapy and conventional counseling? Because you could say you already were approaching things from like a balanced perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, so I have been dancing ever since I was little. Like I was that little girl that sat in front of the mirror in full-on costume
Oh.
and, act and sung and danced. And so then I started dance classes really early. So movement has been a part of my life from the beginning, really. And thankfully, my parents were very supportive of that and fostering that. So I went on to dance through high school, undergrad, graduate school, with various ensembles and things like that. So it was dance is like home for me. And so
Mm.
when I went to college, I was majoring in psychology. It kind of have always been aligned with that. Like I don't have the math brain, but give me an essay to read and code, and
Mm.
I love that. And so I was getting my BA in psych, and I had a professor from my health psychology class who introduced me to this field of psychology called dance movement therapy.
Mm.
And this was over 20 years ago at this point. And I remember sitting down in our commons area in the dorm and going, I think that's what I want to do. And so then we didn't have at my undergrad university, we didn't have that as a major. It was only pretty much on the graduate level. And
Mhm.
so I created a capstone project and added that to my psych degree in undergrad. And then I sought out a university for my graduate school that combined counseling and psychology with dance movement therapy, because at that time, somatics were still alternative.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then until more recent with the rise of social media and all the data that now supports what we
Mhm.
kind of instinctually know. Um, so it wasn't, uh, we, most programs in dance movement therapy combine it with traditional counseling and psychology so
Mhm.
that, hey, this thing tanked or you couldn't get the grant or the support or the funding for it, at
Mm.
least had, your traditional psychology masters. So that's kind of how I came into both. But it really was this innate um, enjoyment for movement. Movement has always been a
Yeah.
place for me to uncover and recover.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that kind of was a synchronicity because back then it wasn't, known, right? And so for that to like show up for you, it must have felt like, are you kidding me? This isn't studying. This is like my life. And
Hmm.
it makes me remember in my cohort at Pacifica, there was a woman who is still my friend, and she's a healer. And the way she used to walk, I told her, I said, you have like this goddess energy. And she's like, what? Like she had no idea. She was so insecure, but she had gone through a process of movement therapy to come into a different relationship with the way she moved. And I remember one of the days we were working a dream. And so we're all mostly using our verbal skills and our mind to articulate, our insights or the meaning we found in the dream. And she said, I don't have words. I don't have words. And she said, all I feel is like I should do this. And she like in this reverent way, like knelt down and went like for my listeners, like went down like she was scooping something up from the earth and then she offered it. And it was like she kept doing this movement and I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel like that dynamic. And so, the thing about the feminine is sometimes the mind can't articulate the insight because the insight is always felt in the body first. right?
Hmm.
And so there's this like space between the creative feminine and the insight and then being able to articulate through the mind. So body sometimes is the way that you feel the insight that you can't articulate yet. Or
Hmm.
for me, drawing, like there was a 2 year time period where I had an image journal and I used Tanka poetry as a way to like capture things that I couldn't articulate through the mind. So I love that. I was so excited to find that in your background.
Hmm.
So, all right, well, let's talk about this awesome organization you founded called Five Peaks. And the purpose is really to take, I love the idea of taking mental wellness outside of the therapy room. And this reminds me, I sent you a note that reminds me of James Hillman, who is the founder of archetypal psychology, which is part of depth psychology. And he wrote a couple of really interesting books. And one is called We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. And the other
Yeah.
one is called The Myth of Analysis. And another one is a great one, and it's Revisioning Psychology. And he offers like an archetypal framework. So using like the Greek myths, the Roman myths, whatever myths
Yeah, super
as a
interesting.
way to attach archetypal characters to your inner world. So, and the reason that Five Peaks reminds me of this is one of the things that he sort of complained about was number one, he thought the whole field of therapy kind of became so masculinized and had a hero's complex. So all the power is in the therapist, right? And then the other thing that he said was, that we, society, have personalized mental health issues. Where, yes, of course, our patterns are rooted in our early childhood experiences, but some of those experiences and traumas came from a system outside of our childhood experiences, or even as an adult going to like high school could, be a traumatic experience, not just for one individual, but like collectively. So that, and then on the other hand, though, that, and I love when he says that the therapy room is really a potential cell of revolution. So that not only are you healing yourself, but then when you show up in the world and you understand how you're then impacting the large. So anyway, that came up for me when I was reading about like, what is this Five Peaks thing? So yeah, so tell me like why did you do that? And what is your overall sort of mission and burning desire around that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just touch on a couple different things.
Hmm.
So, I love that quote and that reference that you gave because it really points to our interconnectedness
Hmm.
that we share, which reminds me of Dr. Dan Siegel. He's the founder of interpersonal neurobiology, which is something that I also have training in.
Mm.
That is essentially this consilient framework. Like we draw from all these different disciplines to understand the human experience.
Yeah.
So from, physics to anthropology to sociology to psychology. And we take all the goodness of what we know and combine it into like really understanding that. But with interpersonal biology, Dr. Siegel also highlights that we have this, that we're like these conduits of energy and information
Hmm.
flow
Yeah.
within and between. So
Yeah.
there is this like scientific,
Hmm.
spiritual basis for connection. Um, and it's something that he calls the me and the we. We combine it into we. It's a we
Mm.
experience. And
Ooh.
he understands um, well-being through this lens of the brain, the mind, and relationship. So it is like this community experience as well.
Yeah.
It's not just within, but it is between. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that, which is an integrative process, and framework in and of itself. So when it comes to Five Peaks, so I had been in private practice for years, not to age and date myself, but for years. And it was in 2019. So this happened before COVID, before there was like the rise of master classes and social media, mental health awareness and everything. I just kept hearing from my clients, from friends, like, why does it take us to get here,
Mm.
therapy or adversity, to learn this, which was essentially resilience. That's what I specialize in is resilience skill building, among a few other things. And I thought, well, yeah, why? It doesn't have to. And resilience from as a basis, is a preventative health measure. And so I thought, well, why don't I take what I do in these four walls and take it out to my community? And so that's what I did. I offered like I created a curriculum, offered a series of classes on resilience based on the work of Dr. Rick Hansen, who's just this brilliant psychologist out of UC Berkeley and one of the founders of the Greater Science Center. Um, and so his 12 strengths of resilience, and people were hungry for it. I mean, they just were waiting for something like this to be offered. So it was really fun. And from there, it grew into consulting with businesses and corporations, and to speaking engagements.
Yeah.
So it's this way to bring the awareness that well-being is a skill
Mm.
into into our community, outside the therapy setting, and an encouragement for people to practice.
Yeah. I love it. It reminds me, I don't know how many decades ago this is now, but Daniel Goleman writing about emotional intelligence, like, yeah, those are skills that you build, right? Why are people teaching us these skills? I've always thought that, because not everybody goes to college, that seniors should actually explore their parental complexes before they go out into the world to
Mm,
realize that they already have patterns. And we don't have to demonize the parents ever. We can if we want, but really it's just
right.
like, this is my tendency to how to react to things and how to respond. And to
Mm,
know that, eventually some of those patterns might stop working. So instead of like being in a crisis, just be like, oh yeah, I remember when I was a senior in high school and I learned about my mother complex. Whoop, there it is.
yeah,
Like that actually is a skill, that sort of awareness.
absolutely. And I think, um, offering this introduction into
Mhm.
well-being, in the ways that I have with these classes, it does allow someone to awaken to what their narrative is. And that's exciting to see
Yeah.
happen. It's not necessarily in a therapeutic setting, but it's in this kind of curious,
Yeah.
exploratory, insight-driven, meaning-making experience.
And you know what? Oh, you know what's coming up for me is I think that then that contributes to a sense of there's a book written of hard optimism,
Mm,
because the research around hard optimism is this victim consciousness versus like there is there is a way that I can deal with my circumstances without having the power to change the circumstances, but like, for example, I have a core belief that, you know what, I'll figure it out. Like, that's a core belief that some people don't have. And so when you mention like their story or their narrative, it's easier than to like go look at it from over here and be like, oh, that's just a story, right? So it's like empowering.
hmm
And then you're not maybe like, I don't know, maybe it doesn't take as like a full-blown crash right, for you to like be able to like get back on track.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, I practice from an integrative practice
Hmm.
perspective too, and it aligns with that as well as like, can we take these distinct parts of us
Hmm.
and begin to link them
Yeah.
instead of feeling like we're blended in this,
Yeah.
smoothie where we don't know what ends and what begins.
Yeah.
Um, so important to be able to step back and take that observer
Yeah.
view.
I,
Mhm.
I call that random access memory. So I tell people
Say it
like,
again.
random access memory, like all these things are
Access.
floating in
Yeah.
you, and like
Mhm.
you're at an unconscious level, you're like making calculations of worst case scenarios. And in quantum mechanics, there's an infinite field of possibilities, and it's all just like condensed in like this emotion that suddenly feels overwhelmed and it's exaggerated. And it's because inside we're not a card catalog. It's all just floating around random access memory. So what you say also, the interconnectedness of all of us reminds me of a Jungian concept where Jung would say, between you and I, there's four conversations happening. There's
Mm,
our minds are speaking to each other, where our mind is saying, oh, I see Jennifer. I hear what she's saying. This is what I think she means. I think she thinks I mean this. Who knows if she does? And then your mind is speaking to my unconscious, your unconscious absorbing so much more than your mind can be aware of. And then where the real fun is happening is between our unconscious, like it's a
yeah.
playground. So
Mhm.
that's just between you and me. Now you put us in a room with like other people, and then you put us in a community, and this is how it just gets all mushed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So I love
interesting.
it. So, okay, well, why don't you share the story of how we started working together? And we were talking earlier about Rhonda Noordick. We're both fans. She's the founder of Women's Financial Wellness. She has a really great podcast. And I think I know for sure. I'm like, how did you hear me? And you're like, oh, I listened to you on Rhonda's podcast. And she specializes in helping women who are making a decision to get divorced or preparing for divorce or the aftermath of divorce. Um, I'm always looking for the sneaky psyche. And what was it that? And I think you mentioned in your note about there was like a
Hmm.
nudge for like, So I always tell my clients, you only know 20% of what's going on.
Right.
So, right? So most
Mhm.
of it you don't understand, but it's like yourself, capital S, just kind of like poking and prodding at you. So, yeah, so I don't know what you were thinking at the time. So I'm curious to hear this story.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to reflect back on that. So I'm a therapist, obviously. I've sought out therapy at various times in my life, and at this time of my life, it was about a year after my dad had passed, and I just could tell that there was some nagging grief that was going on. I didn't really have like I wasn't in a ton of distress, but like, yeah, I think it would be good for me to, talk to someone right now. And I had gotten a referral from a friend, colleague, to see this woman who was in a medical setting. So she was working at a behavioral clinic within a hospital. So I kind of already knew what I was getting into. Therapists who work under a medical model have to adhere to certain mandates, for claim submission and all of that. So I maybe like a handful of sessions, and we were in the session, and she was like, "You know what? I don't think you have a problem. I don't think that I have anything to offer to help you."
Mm.
And I remember kind of giggling, kind of being a little in shock, like, "Oh, I just got fired." You know? Um, but and also like as a therapist again, having like a respect for what that means for a therapist to
Yeah,
communicate to you. You're like, hey, I don't have the training and the way that you need to be supported, or let me refer you out, or et cetera. But I can understand from someone who doesn't have that kind of insider knowledge how a new, individual seeking out therapy, that could be a really shocking experience for them,
yeah,
to like, I'm sorry, I can't help you, or, maybe you should look
yeah,
elsewhere. So she was very, you know, kind in her delivery, with all of the right therapeutic jargon.
yeah.
Uh, but what she didn't say was, maybe you're looking for something that's more spiritual based.
Mm.
And I think I had just gotten too existential on her. you
Oh,
know, was kind of
yeah,
not as linear and logical, like in her solution focused,
yeah,
framework. And so I took that away as a positive. I came away from that with a positive experience, um, and said, okay, well, let me investigate that. Maybe there's something to that. And so it was maybe 6, 9 months later, I was listening to the podcast of you, and I couldn't tell you what it was that you said, but I think it was this remembrance of depth psychology. So it's
mm,
part of my training, the somatic training that I had in dance movement therapy. It's very grounded in psychodynamics, and so I'm familiar with Jung and archetypes, and it wasn't unfamiliar
yeah,
language to me or theory, and again, have an affinity with the value of that. And so I think I was like, oh, well, I'm not an expert in that field, because as a therapist, um, we can easily kind of defend our way
yeah,
through through a conversation with another therapist. Um, and so I didn't necessarily want to seek out someone who did what I did.
yeah.
Um, I wanted to be aware of my blind spots. And so then, hearing you, I thought, okay, I'll reach out to Deborah. And that's how we began.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? I think that was one of my first podcast interviews, and I would not want to listen to it right now because I was like so drowning in my own experience at the time. So I feel like back then Yes, I was sharing concepts, but I was solely sharing them like through my lived experience. Like I feel like my unraveling happened in parallel fashion during my master's and PhD. So I literally experienced and I know like all those concepts. Like I remember being someplace and I was literally reading about being in the grip of a complex. Boom.
Mm,
And I was like, oh my God, I know what it means. Oh my God, this is what they're talking about to be in the grip of a complex. Because if you have never been in the grip of a complex, you're like, what? Like, what? Why would that happen to you? So, but a couple of things came up for me. When I went to, in my first, I had been to a therapist. My former husband, I had been to some couples therapists and then I tried another therapist but by the end of my first quarter at Pacifica, I was like, oh my God, I got to get myself a Jungian analyst. Do they even have those in Wisconsin? I was like I felt like I was part of this like sacred monastery, Pacifica.
yeah.
And it was in a really beautiful place in California too. So I found Vlado, and I remember like I could tell he wrote his own content on the website. He's from Slovakia and his English is a little broken, but I'm Croatian. So I was like, oh, what's going on here? He
Mm,
answered the phone, like it wasn't the receptionist, and he works for the in the Aurora system. But I remember after like about 6 weeks, I was like, yeah, I feel good. Like I don't think I need to come anymore. And he was so confused. He was like, oh, okay. Like, why do you think that?
mhm,
And I was like, well, I kind of feel like maybe I shouldn't be using insurance dollars because I'm not in crisis. Like, what a weird thing to say.
mhm,
So
mhm,
just kind of the same thing, but and thankfully he's Jungian. So I went in to see him for 5 years. I was like, yeah, I still have anxiety. Like, and
mhm,
but because I just find it interesting that, she said you don't have a problem because from a depth psychology perspective, our individuation path is like a lifelong path. It's
mhm,
not about like there's a problem. There might be a crisis that is really impacting the quality of your life in the moment, but it's really about like I love how you say you're about helping people find the joy and whatever else you said during like the hard times and the hard times and the good times, like that we always like in fact, it's better if you're just kind of always have either a practice on your own that you develop or you're seeing somebody.
mhm,
So
mhm,
the other thing that comes up is that, I don't think Carl Jung said exactly this, but Wayne Dyer says, I'm sure you know Wayne Dyer, that
mhm,
every problem is a spiritual problem.
mhm.
Every
Yeah,
problem is a spiritual problem. If you look at, and that's why you can't really separate from spiritual, psychological and spiritual, because spiritual is connection,
right.
right? Psychology is about being are connected and integrated inside. Well, we don't do that like in isolation from anyone else. So how can you really separate those two things?
Right. And I think it's Dick Schwartz or someone within the IFS, the Internal Family Systems community, who says every problem is a relational problem. But that's, kind of
Same
speaking
thing.
the
Yeah.
same, yeah, same,
Yeah.
different vocabulary, same language.
Yeah. I love it. Well, this is kind of taking us into the field of therapy, which I say looks like it's kind of unraveling and it's going kicking and screaming, hanging on to these constructs and there's this movement outside of conventional therapy that a lot of people are going to. In fact, there's even a lot of licensed therapists who are going outside of like just to have more freedom. And then there's also licensed therapists who are figuring out how to pull in, like you have how to pull in these other approaches. And I feel like we're just ripe. But on the other hand, the downside of all of that is that people can feel like they're drowning in options and opportunities, and not everybody's qualified. And, it's kind of like an anything goes approach. I talk about this in sexuality, actually, like this sort of having complete freedom is a good thing, but without a framework for
Mhm,
finding the meaning in your experience, you will
mhm,
become too literal, right? And therapy can become too literal, just like this, sexuality is usually misunderstood, arousal and attraction. It's usually not about what you think it is about. So I don't know. I'm just I have called this like the age of the individual, not from a narcissist standpoint, but from the standpoint of where religious institutions long time ago it was their job to help individuals develop an inner sort of authority, moral compass. They don't really do that anymore. They just tell you that that's where we are, is doing our own work and our own self-reflection work so that we are able to like resist mass-minded ideas and, the chaos outside. But then, what's the framework so that
Mm.
you at least like have a frame? So I don't know. I'm just curious about your thoughts about like, I don't know, feel the psychology, how it's shaken up and I don't know.
Yeah, I think that like everything has a beginning. There's an origin to everything.
Hmm.
And whether it's religion or some sort of study of something, ego, human
Yeah.
alterity gets involved and
Yeah.
it changes,
Yeah.
oftentimes from its original form. So I think that um, today there is much more attention given to and credibility given to some of our ancient wisdom traditions that
Yeah.
are now integrating with traditional psychology,
Hmm.
which I think is wonderful. And again, you know, our society and culture is very empirical data driven. And so we need that in order to kind of justify a certain direction. But there also is this intuitive knowing that
Yeah.
leads people to it too. It's nice to have both.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very happy to be a part of the resurgence or the coming home, to some of
Yeah.
the basic tenets of well-being, and how we combine them and use them to promote human flourishing. And that's
Yeah.
really what Five Peaks is all about. What my practice is all about is how do we promote human flourishing? And science tells us that we all are born, we all have this innate capacity for resilience. We have
Yeah.
these for flourishing, for resilience. We have strengths of resilience hardwired into our nervous system. And so to be able to have options of
Yeah.
ways to tune into that or to optimize that, I think is great. But also to your point, there's an important suspicion as well.
Hmm.
Uh, without the maybe cynicism,
Right.
but to either have self-suspicion or, suspicion of all others, because mental health is an easy place to take advantage.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is. So yeah, you have to have a keen eye and an open heart, but also, some clarity and guidance on what you're choosing.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you use the word human flourishing. That's because I've just started using that. Just out of the blue, I'm like, yes, there is a new paradigm that's trying to take root. And it is pulling us toward consciousness expansion, which is always about love. And it is about like the systems, because the old systems are stagnant. They're not contributing to human flourishing. They're being corrupted. They're like reducing. They're like getting very reductionist and literal and extreme and all of that. And also, it just reminds me, this is what I love about depth psychology, is that it's an alignment with the root of psychology. So if you like ask people like, what's the root of psychology? It's soul and breath.
Mm,
You're like, what? I thought it was about the brain. Like, I'm so tired of the brain, neuropsychology. Like, and I always want to ask, like, okay, to what end? Like, okay, so now you've said, yes, this is true that the sages 1,000 years ago knew was true. Okay, so what are you doing about that? Right? Like, what are
mm,
you doing with that confirmation? Also reminds me of like, do you remember Dr. Zorba Pastor? Yeah,
no.
public radio, Wisconsin Public Radio. He was a doctor, obviously. He was a medical doctor, but he also was like before complementary medicine was big, like he was into it. And so people will call and say, well, I'm doing this, and I'm taking this. And he said, well, is it helping? And I
Mhm.
said, yeah, it's helping. But so and so said I shouldn't do it. And he said, well, there's no research that says it's bad for you. So if it's helping you, then take it.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is a so what you're saying is like I love how you're like, yeah, suspicious, but we do have intuitive knowledge
Hmm.
and the body always knows the truth. So if you can cultivate a relationship with your body, you can
Hmm.
answer some of those questions for yourself.
And I think,
So, mhm,
oh, sorry. I think too, if we're able to check our own blind spots
yeah,
and see something for what it is and not for all of the, you know, perspectives or judgment that we maybe come with into
Yeah.
the present moment, that can also be very, very helpful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And a good way to do that is like check your emotion. So if there's emotion there, then there's like something old going on. You're not even
Mhm.
seeing clearly.
Mhm.
So,
But I think like that
mhm.
also is a great direction that, of psychology right now is that, the brain isn't just considered the brain, it's an embodied brain. You
Yeah.
know, there's this system that's
Hmm.
at play and how important it is for us to acknowledge that and
Yeah.
to see that as like the medium,
Hmm.
not just one part of us.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So okay, so I was interested in digging a little deeper into sort of my approach and your experience with my approach and how it contributed to your uh, self-care practice, and also what your experience with things like active imagination and the way that I explore dreams and whatever else was different in what I did. And then how that experience led you to maybe like, how did you choose? Like, oh, with my client, that client could like, I'm going to bring that in where I didn't before. So I'm just curious about that.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed our work together and it was super
Same.
enlightening, so thank you for spending the time with me and I'm sure I'll revisit. But for me, as you know, I can lean more towards the intellect
Hmm.
and analyzing. And so to be able to be encouraged or dropped into image
Mm.
or word, like through written word, with some of the journaling, which I've been a journaler since I was little. So, I kind of already have like an affinity for that, but particularly like not going to words right away or not going to
Mm.
thought right away
Mm.
and allowing the unfolding to just appear. That's been, that was a super fun experience with you. And it also wasn't completely foreign either. So even though I may be a little bit more intellectual, I still am body based with some of my training and with somatic, work. On a small scale, little scale, we oftentimes go to the body before we go to the mind. And so it was this encouragement for me to practice what I'm oftentimes encouraging others to do. So I
Yeah.
that was great.
Yeah. And what about like I don't know if you can think off the top of your head, but was there an experience in either exploring dreams or active imagination where you're like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting that. Or maybe that happened a lot. I don't know.
Well, yeah, our dream work um was super interesting too. And I think uh my greatest challenge or growth point area in that was learning not to take things literally
Okay,
and
yeah.
and to really understand how your unconscious and someone else's unconscious can
Hmm.
interplay.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Play is the word. Yeah.
yeah, in some way. Um, and so, in my own practice, I have worked with guided imagery and things like that for a long time. Meditation, mindfulness, things that are definitely more inward focused.
Hmm.
But it was nice to do that with you and then feel a bit of proficiency to be able to introduce that, with some of my clients,
Mm.
really with some of the parts work that I do, with some IFS theory. I think it's shown to be helpful for clients to go into this active imagination,
Yeah.
um, to help them identify parts,
Yeah.
and really get kind of a shape, a feel, a relationship, with what that is. So that's been um, definitely beneficial in what I've done. I am also someone who never touts knowing everything. I
Yeah.
think that there's, I don't know the word, that phrase, I don't know is something.
Well, Yeah, do you ever feel
Okay.
I felt this pursuing my master's PhD. It really is true. Like, because people are like, oh, you have a PhD. I'm like, no, are you kidding me? Like, I just know some stuff about some stuff.
Yeah.
And it is true that the more that you know, especially when you delve, is when you have to add to the field. So you really, really go deep into a topic that
Mhm.
you realize the more you know, the more you don't know. That is a very real thing.
Oh, hugely. Hugely. And I never claim to know. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
waking up to new wonder every day and every
Yeah.
experience. Um, so with that comes a very clear admission to my clients, like I'm not the expert when it
Mm.
comes to dreams.
Yeah.
I'm not the expert even when it comes to active imagination.
Yeah.
So I've referred a couple clients your way.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's nice to have a trusted referral source,
Yeah.
to go to, knowing that they're gonna be well cared for and challenged too. I think that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I learned from personal experience, there are some insights that cannot come through the mind.
Hmm.
And as much as in the therapy room, we try to imagine and be embodied, we're just always like, even with my Jungian analyst, I realized that, depth psychology is the psychology of the feminine, basically the psychology of the unconscious. And even in my, sessions, I was like, we're still pretty much up here in the mind, even if we're like discussing like, oh, the potential symbolism of this. So, sometimes an insight cannot come through the mind.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so, even though one of my dual master in dance movement therapy, I don't practice dance movement therapy in the
Hmm.
traditional sense anymore.
Yeah.
But I do incorporate the somatic experiencing,
Yeah.
in various forms
Yeah.
into my practice. And so, still a good chunk of what I do is talk therapy.
Hmm.
For me, then, it is again this kind of integrative process for
Yeah.
not the client, but for myself, so that
Yeah.
I stay grounded in this kind of open place of mind and body, spirit and logic,
Hmm.
as well as being able to guide my clients through that too.
Yeah. And also, with Five Peaks, you're teaching people how to go try something on their own too. So
Hmm.
you might not do a movement thing with them, but you might alert them that how their
Hmm.
body moves is a way that their unconscious is communicating to them. So they might notice something about their posture and, or whatever it is. So I remember taking I had a quarter of somatic depth psychology, but it was only two classes. And in the one day, oh my gosh, so your response right away, my response to even having to do what we had to do. And she's like, I'm going to play some music, and all I want you guys to do is get up and move the way that you feel like you want to move. And so at first I was like, I'm very guarded, right?
Hmm.
So, well, you wouldn't know that, but I am. But so I'm walking around and then all of a sudden there's some music and I'm like, oh crap, I want to skip. No, I don't want to skip. Oh no, yes, you must skip. I mean, there was like this, and it was so interesting. I mean, there were tears, some people, there were tears, but not only the sound too, right? So it was not only the sound, but the sound that prompted a kind of movement that your defense mechanism was like, No, you can't. Oh my gosh, it was just amazing. So I only have two classes in, somatic depth psychology, but it was enough for me, enough to alert me that my
Yeah.
body is always a way my unconscious is speaking to me.
Yeah. And we call that authentic movement,
Mm,
which is interesting because, many dancers are attracted to the field of dance movement therapy. And it takes some untraining for us to move authentically because most of our movement is choreographed,
yeah,
throughout our movement experience. But
yeah,
even someone who hasn't been in the dance world, there
yeah,
are um, stereotypes
yeah.
to what how much out of our shell we allow ourselves to go.
Yeah. Well, you know
So
what?
it is.
Something is oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's a very liberating process.
Well, I mean, two things come to mind. One is Marianne Williamson, who said, oh no, now I just lost my track. All right, I'll go to the other one. There was a story that I heard, and it was a YouTube host that had a very like somebody who would listen to all his YouTube videos, but he hated him. He was always like he was very bigoted, especially against LGBTQ. And so the host had on a psychologist who like basically held space for this man. And he just kept asking him questions like, like, oh, tell me about this, tell me about that. And well, what was that like for you? And he got right to the root of his bigotry. And he had this memory. He said, you know what? As a child, I loved to skip. I don't know
Mm,
why. I just love skipping down the sidewalk. But these boys would bully me and belittle me, and he had to stop skipping. And
mm,
so that was a natural way for him to think about what is more liberating than skipping. In fact, that's something that when I reconnected with my inner child during my midlife unraveling, like literally I had to overcome the awkwardness of that. I would just break out skipping down the sidewalk. I had to, like she had to express herself. So I would do it and then I'd laugh and I'd twirl and I'm like, oh my God, the cops are looking at me right now. Like I must be crazy. But yeah, like think about that. That was repressed in him and it caused like this projection of his self-hate. Oh, it was just such a sad story. Yeah. I forget what I was going to say about Marianne Williamson, but oh well.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's reasons that we have like Vester Bandikov's, book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah,
Um, we carry our stories,
I know.
our muscles and our bones and
Yeah.
all of the synaptic connections that are happening.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, now I'm
small,
glad that
small and big ways going to the body is beneficial and helpful. It doesn't have to be dance movement therapy. And like I said, I don't really even practice traditionally that anymore,
yeah.
but um, the body enters every experience.
It's always speaking, isn't it?
Mhm.
So, okay, well, do you have like, I don't know, what didn't we talk about that you want to talk about? Do you have any topics that you're way into right now, or a powerful experience you want to share, or something you prepared to talk about that we didn't hit on?
One thing that I was thinking about as I was kind of preparing for this and thinking about, okay, like what was our time like together?
Hmm.
Um, what are some of my takeaways? What are some of the memorable experiences that we had? And I remember you had given me this encouragement one day to like meander.
Oh, I
Like
love that word.
you like to go outside your, door and just like, I don't know, do I go left? Do I go right? And that was kind of like hitting more towards kind of the rigidity, that I can sometimes find myself into or
Yeah,
the strategy,
yeah.
kind of wound tightness. And so it wasn't long after that, I went on kind of this mini getaway with one of my dearest friends, Callie. Is just like this amazing human. And, but she's also very like intuitive and instinctual driven.
Mm.
Like directions are not like
Oh,
a force.
spontaneous, like to the nth degree.
And we were in Colorado in Rocky National Park, and we just kept getting lost. Like we meandered like nobody meandered. We just
And did you love it? What were your
loved
emotions?
it. Oh my gosh,
Oh, yay.
and why we loved it so much was because there were so many happy surprises.
Oh,
So that you weren't moving in the direction that you thought that you were supposed to, or maybe you should do. Like this trail is obviously not the one we're supposed to be on. Um, but we ran into a herd of elk
oh
and
my
all of these
gosh.
really really cool things happened. So that kind of tagged back in my memory of just this offering of what would it be like to meander and
Mm,
then to put it into practice
yeah.
in a way that was um, community. There was I wasn't alone in that. It was
Yeah.
a shared
Hmm.
experience, so it just kind of heightened the pleasure of it. Um, so that, yeah, that was something that I remember.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I tell those clients, so that was like a little shift and your unconscious rewarded you for like that's a perfect example of when you're trying to disrupt a pattern, like your go-to would be to overthink something or whatever, and you're like, nope, I am here to meander. And then, the good things that happened were the reward, the reinforcement. Because at some point, as we build like our container, our capacity to be more meandering, we will come across like, there'll be like what feels like a regressive experience, and then you'll shrink back and be like, oh my gosh, I should have overthought that or whatever it is. But the rewards are what are like trying to tease you into the future to like build that meandering into your life. So I love stories like that.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think it came at kind of a synchronistic time too,
Mm.
because, as I was exploring work with you, I'm in midlife, I'm in perimenopause, all of those
Oh
super
yeah.
fun, second half of life things. Um, and just innately in that was a expansion that
Mhm.
I wasn't aware that was coming.
Yeah.
And so it was, I don't know, it was sweet to be able to have that, what you offered complement where I was kind of transitioning naturally, um, and being able to do it in a reflective,
Yeah.
nature so that, because meaning making is very important to me.
Mhm.
Insight's very important to me. So to be able to kind of connect the dots in ways, but also see that there's so many causes and conditions, to any particular moment or space and time, and to give those things credit. Notice what's helping, notice what's not helping.
Yeah. Yeah, I have an obsession with finding meaning too. I mean, sometimes my sisters are like, maybe there's just no meaning in that right now. And I'm like,
Hmm.
well, that could be because maybe I'm over attached to the idea of finding meaning. So then I'm like, okay, I'll let that I'll let that go. But I'm kind of obsessed with finding meaning too. So
Well, and that's the other thing that I remember working on with you, is that there's a dark and light side to everything.
yes,
Right? So
yes.
there's your example of that and how important it is for us to have clarity in that,
Yeah.
acknowledgement of
Yeah, and
that.
I don't like the word balance because people think, oh, every day I have to be balanced. No, no, no. No, it's more fluid. Because sometimes you do have to be manic in order to get through something, and then you rest, right? So sometimes you might have a 3-month period where you're very analytical in order to get through a certain phase of whatever, you're starting a new business, and then you have to pull back and allow the creative feminine. And so it's really not about like every day I'm balanced. No.
Yeah. And I would kind of reference that to, agility
Ooh,
or
I like that word
flexibility,
too. Ooh, yeah.
which is,
Versatility, yeah.
yeah, all of that. When we just referencing resilience, we oftentimes think or say and it is by definition, the ability to bounce back after adversity. But what are we bouncing back to?
Ooh,
And where's our agility and our adaptation in all of that? That's really what's going to get us to the other side in an optimal
ooh.
way.
I like that because bounce back, that's interesting because, I always tell my clients that what feels like a regression isn't really a regression. It's more like a pulling back of energy. And typically it indicates that you're ready for some kind of an expansion. But if you don't know that, you can stay. So even like what does bounce back to? Okay, you maybe bounce back to a pleasant plateau, I call it. And then suddenly energy is freed up to and one day you notice, oh, I'm doing that differently. So like even that whole notion of like bouncing. I like bouncing too, because in the
Mhm.
end, it's about being pulled forward. So,
Mhm.
oh, I
Mhm.
love it. How about anything like, is there any, like, what do you want for people? What do you want for my listeners? Do you like followers? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have, articles? Do you want to promote something? Do you do virtual events? Do you little online courses or?
Yeah, so I have a retreat coming up that I'm going to be a keynote speaker at soon
Oh,
for young moms.
hmm,
So I don't think that that's going to be broadcast, but if you're in the Lake Country area,
okay.
look at Lake Country Littles. That's coming up in April. And then I am going to be offering another series of classes, hopefully in May. I got to fine tune the dates
Okay.
and get that out there. But that is sort of my master class in resilience and well-being, where we
Oh,
go through these various strengths of resilience and how we apply them in everyday life.
and that's a virtual thing.
That's, yes, I will
Oh.
do an in-person and a virtual option.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll get information from that because there's time for me to send out a newsletter. And honestly, I think probably at least half of the people on my email list are from Wisconsin
Oh,
and the
really?
Milwaukee area. Yeah, because I lived there until I was
Mhm.
50. So most of the people on my email list are still in back home. So Yeah, and I'll put all of your links, your website, if you want people, you just tell me if you want people to follow you on Instagram or whatever, be on your newsletter list. So, and also I love therapists as clients. I've got two right now. One works for Mayo Clinic, and she works in the part of the clinic that prepares people for like gastric bypass surgery, like weight loss things. It's very sad, actually. And so she's working with the body, people in their relationship with the body. And she's like, oh my gosh, I never heard, like, I feel gypped. She and her husband are both psychologists. And she's like, I feel gypped in what we didn't learn because I turned her on to Marion Woodman. So if
Mm,
you're not familiar with Marion Woodman, Jungian analyst, oh my gosh, you might want to check her out. She's all about the body and a depth psychology perspective to the deeper thing that's going on beneath the eating disorders. And then my other client, she's like all about sex education and sexology, and I think she's a sex therapist. And but what you said, your biggest obstacle with working with dreams is literal. We just automatically want to literalize things, and it's just hard. It's a hard habit to break. So that's why it's helpful to have a partner. Be like, oh, let's think about like what does that represent, not literal. What does it represent in you? And so it's interesting that she came to me. She actually went to Vlado's online dream workshop that you wanted to go to, but you
yeah,
couldn't.
yeah.
And she came to me from there, and she was having a lot of energy around sexuality. And now after we've been working, she is unleashing creatively. And I said, there you go. So you thought that was like a literal thing, and really what it was is like creative intelligence, like overwhelming you with whatever you couldn't make sense out of it, and now she like has this new direction and she has resolved some things. And so I love having therapist clients because I'm not a trained therapist. I just do my depth psychology thing.
Well,
So yeah, go ahead.
what I think is nice about what you offer, that's I don't want to say it's non-traditional from psychology, but it's not
Yeah,
as commonly practiced
yeah,
in practice, in private practice, is and really about many things in life is when we stop fearing uncertainty, we realize that there's just a world of possibility that
yeah,
opens up on the other side. And that's
yeah,
kind of you tell that story is, to kind of drop some of our guard, have the courage to walk into that place of uncertainty, like, wow, what's possible?
yeah.
That
And
comes
being,
from
yeah, and just being like curious, having curiosity about it. And then also a sense of humor is really important. I mean, sense of
Mhm.
humor was my coping mechanism to get through my midlife unraveling because I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't do this right.
Mhm.
So I had to deal with like, I didn't do it the right way. That was my constant thing. So I had to start like finding it humorous and looking at myself like a movie. So, oh, that's Jungian film theory. I love bringing that in. So, well, anything else? I loved our conversation because it's very felt very dance-like.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. It's again, it's fun to reflect back. Um, when I think of anything else, I guess, something that I would put out there for your listeners, because this
Hmm.
is also something that I'm an advocate of, is taking in the good.
Mm.
And you had highlighted that at some point in our conversation. I remember kind of tagging it. Um, but again, just the way that our nervous system is set up, we just linger with everything that
Yeah.
hurts,
Yeah.
that goes on. Um, it's sort of this, offsetting that equilibrium for ourselves. And there's certain ways to do that. And that's part of the resilience building that, I offer in the classes, or that um, I do work with clients, is that there is, pain is a part of life, but so is joy.
Yeah.
And it's really, really crucial for us to be able to have a relationship with that too,
Yeah.
and to notice it and to recognize it and to literally take it in, to savor it, to enhance it, to
Yeah.
linger in it, not in a
Linger.
Pollyanna way, you
Another
know?
one of my favorite words, linger. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, not in a Pollyanna way, but in like in a real way. Like, what's the reality that's actually in front of you? So, I guess, yeah, that would just be something that I would throw out there. That's also important to kind of a basis of how I practice too,
I
which
love
goes along
it.
with agility.
And
being
I
able
love
to.
the timing. I love the timing of your course. I think you'll probably get some takers for my list because my message right now has been about that during this time when things are falling apart and new things are taking root, but you can't necessarily see the new things that are taking root, but that having your own psycho-spiritual practice right now where you're able to build in breath and stillness and at least find moments of even neutrality emotionally, that actually not only improves the quality of your life and it helps your brain work better. So if we're always just emotionally reacting because things are upsetting right now, but if we can like do the self-reflection about what is my emotion about, and once you discover that, you can disarm the emotion. You're able to see the truth of the situation and act correctly and
Mhm.
take action, but you're not taking action out of a place of emotion, of fear, or scarcity. You're taking empowered action, and that actually contributes to the new paradigm that's trying to take root instead of like the resistance. So I love the timing of your course. It fits nicely into like my message right now to people. So, well, thank you so much for taking time for our chat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're
Appreciate it.
welcome. Now I'm just going to read my little outro. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jennifer Van Rossum. I hope our conversation inspired you to start or strengthen your own psychospiritual practice that tends to your mind, heart, and soul. And you might take advantage of Jennifer's courses and resources. And one more thing, if you enjoyed this interview or my other interviews, subscribe and leave a review. And also even consider being a monthly supporter for like $5 a month. And until next time.